Afternoon. It's Monday, the 2nd of March 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio, I'm delighted to say, is David Scott. Welcome to the programme.
It's very nice to be here in sunny Plymouth.
Excellent. Right. Well, we're going to get straight on then with what's going on in Syria. Apparently President Erdogan has made a telephone call to President Putin. Here's what Dmitry Peskov had to say about that. He said that they are scheduling a meeting between Putin and Erdogan in Moscow on the 5th or 6th of March. I believe it's now been set for the 5th. And so that was being worked out at that point. Lavrov, for his part, had this to say. He said that a phone call between the presidents has been held at the initiative of Turkey. The talks were detailed. He said a possibility was discussed to shortly hold necessary contacts at this or that level. Literally an hour and a half ago, reports came that the Russian and Turkish negotiators who worked in Ankara yesterday and the day before yesterday had agreed to continue work today. So that was at the end of last week. And then there was a Security Council meeting held in Moscow. This is not a UN Security Council meeting, this is a Russian Security Council meeting. At which Dmitry Peskov had claimed that the Turkish side did not report about the presence of Turkish forces there despite Russian inquiries. So the Russians denying any responsibility for the alleged Turkish deaths. Now, I'm not sure that we've got a clear picture yet, David, on whether these 33 Turkish deaths were actually Turkish citizens or Turkish proxies, i.e. rebels. Yes. Terrorists, whatever they might be. But to discuss this a little bit more and to find out a lot more about what's actually going on the ground in Idlib, we're delighted to be joined by Vanessa Beeley. Welcome to the programme, Vanessa.
Hi, Mike. The sound is not brilliant, so I'll try and keep up with it. It keeps breaking up, but I'm here.
Yes. Now, we should say that you are in or around Idlib, so it is sort of a very much on the fly video link, and hopefully this will work. So what is the feeling on the ground in Syria about what has happened over the last several days between the Syrian army and the Russian army?
Well, I mean, the sequence of events, basically the time that I've just spent in Idlib in the last few days, I made it to Sarakeb before it was it wasn't actually taken over by the terrorist groups. They attacked after the Syrian Arab Army had liberated Sarakeb. They attacked from the north and the west. We visited Marat al-Numan, which is before Sarakeb, on the old road which takes you from Damascus to Aleppo, which at that point was fully liberated. At that point, I was told there were 43 Turkish bases. When I'm talking about bases, I'm not talking about what they euphemistically call observation points. I'm talking about military bases that had been established in a period of weeks since the escalation of the Syrian Arab Army and allied military campaign against the terrorist groups in Idlib. The road at one point for us was cut off by a quickly established Turkish base. We had to take a side road, and even there were 4 bases that I photographed containing Turkish soldiers, armored vehicles, heavy weapons, etc. This isn't some kind of benign occupation of Idlib. In the last few weeks, more than 8,100 Turkish soldiers have entered Idlib. The 33 soldiers that were killed were definitely Turkish soldiers. Right. And the reason that the Syrian army had to withdraw from Sarakeb in the last few days, 2 nights ago was a horrible night here, was simply because Turkish drones were targeting the positions of both Hezbollah and Iranian forces. We know that there were a number of commanders killed 2 nights ago. They were targeting Syrian Arab army positions, and these were actually effectively unchallenged by Russian air defense missiles. Now the Syrian Arab Army has moved its own air defense into the area, and that's why they've achieved the retaking of Sarakeb in the early hours of this morning, because they were able to defend themselves effectively against air attacks by Erdogan's forces, drone attacks, not actual airplane, because of course now Syria has closed off the airspace except to Russian planes. So they have the right under international law to bring down any Turkish aircraft or drones that are in the air, and they've brought down at least 6 in the last 24 hours. So this has basically prevented Erdogan's policy of targeting the Syrian army by air. We have the impression on the ground that Russia and Iran actually are trying to maintain a sort of negotiation process with Turkey. Both of them, of course, benefit economically with their partnership or their bilateral partnerships with Turkey, and they appear to be keen to maintain some kind of truce between at least the Russian forces, the Iranian forces, and the Turkish forces. So they're very much allowing Syria to fight this war on their own territory that has been invaded by an aggressive, hostile state, which is supreme aggression under international law, and this kind of global insecurity is completely unacceptable. This is a NATO member state invading a sovereign state without any kind of mandate. This is a descent into complete global insecurity.
Yes. Now, this morning, just before we get into some of the photographs and video that you've sent me over, this morning on BBC Radio 4's Today programme, they had the Turkish Erdogan spokeswoman effectively justifying this action, claiming that Turkey is dealing with 4 million refugees, that nobody else is really helping them with it. They're not getting the funding they were promised, and that therefore justifies this invasion of their neighbour. What's the Syrian attitude to the excuses that Turkey's making about this at the moment?
I mean, any thinking, rational, logical person would say then Turkey should perhaps stop funding and arming and power multiplying Al-Qaeda in Syria, who are effectively producing the refugees. The refugees, of course, are made up of a number of, or let's say 3 elements. Those that are fleeing the area of conflict, the area of war, they are not being allowed to leave via the humanitarian corridors set up by Syria and Russia, because the terrorists are preventing them. The terrorists are sniping them, the terrorists are shelling them, the terrorists are leaving mines in the roads that form the humanitarian corridor, so they're unable to leave. They only have one option, which is to leave towards the north and towards Turkey. Some others are those that have been simply indoctrinated by the terrorist groups, by these extremist groups whose occupation they've lived under for almost 10 years now, into a sort of a fear-based reaction, which is if they are caught with the terrorists, they may be killed, they may be affected, they may be wounded, so they're leaving. The others, of course, are those who ideologically comply with the terrorists and who are leaving, or are the terrorist families, and those are leaving. But the fact is that this situation would not exist if Turkey had not, in the first place, incubated terrorism in Turkey and then sent it into Syria, and in the last few months been, as I said, providing weapons, equipment, and now reinforcements for Al-Qaeda inside Idlib. So Turkey has nobody to blame but itself for the refugees that are now inside Turkey. And of course, it's used this to benefit and profit from as regards receiving funding from the EU and using it as blackmail and as a threat against the EU.
Turkey, sorry, you were going to ask something?
Well, as I've been following this from afar, and I've been seeing the general progression of the Syrian Arab army retaking area after area of Syria, is it fair to say that absent the Turkish intervention now, the war would already have been over? It's only Turkish troops that's prolonging this. Is that a correct assessment?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. So Vanessa, obviously things pretty intense on the ground here. Now this is quite dark, this video, but clearly it's pretty heavy fighting here. And who's being attacked in this little video clip?
This is a clip taken by Syrian Arab Army soldiers of the attack on Sarakeb, I think 2 or 3 nights ago, when in fact, as I said, once Turkey started to deploy very heavily armed drones, the Syrian Arab Army had to withdraw to a defensive position. Of course, now, since the air defense systems are in place, they've been able to respond and to bring down the drones that were causing the damage, and now they've retaken Sarakeb and Zawi Mountain to the south of Idlib, but the north of Hama. And actually, they've been progressing and taking more villages since those air defense systems are in place.
Yes, and this one?
This is a Turkish missile being fired from Turkish territory into Idlib.
And so, how often? What sort of level of bombardment are the Turkish?
It's very heavy bombardment. They've been targeting specifically, of course, Syrian Arab Army positions, Iranian and Hezbollah positions. So effectively, what we're seeing actually is Turkey acting in complete coordination and collaboration with Israel, because of course Israel has also flown helicopters into Syrian territory in the south in the last few days and injured 3 Syrian soldiers in the southern area near the occupied Golan territories. So what we're seeing here is a pincer action by Israel and by Turkey in complete coordination, and we've seen this for the last sort of few months since the Idlib campaign began.
Well, I'm seeing a lot of comment in mainstream press about rebels holding area in western Aleppo. What is the situation in Aleppo at the moment?
Well, actually, I've literally just arrived back from West Aleppo. I entered as far as Umm al-Kubra. I don't know if you remember, that was where Russia was accused by the UN of having bombed the humanitarian convoy in 2016. And of course, the evidence to support that claim was given by the White Helmets, who were embedded in this area with the groups like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is al-Qaeda in Syria, and Nour al-Zinki, who were a US-funded extremist gang who beheaded Abdullah Isa in July 2016 in Aleppo. Today, I got as far as Umm al-Kubra, which is about 1 kilometer from the terrorist positions. The terrorists have basically been cleansed. When I say terrorists, they are terrorists. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham are a designated terrorist group. They've been basically pushed out of the western suburbs of Aleppo and out of the western countryside as far as 1 kilometer beyond Umm al-Kubra. At that point, we were told to turn back because the risk of mortars was very high. The whole area has been mined by the fleeing armed groups. So it's impossible to move off the main roads because basically you could get blown up. The whole area is infested with mines, so this will take months for the Syrian army and the Russian sappers to clean. So the whole of West Aleppo is clear of terrorist groups, but of course they're still being targeted by mortars from the new armed group front lines, if that makes sense. So although they've managed to push them far enough away that they can no longer target the center of Aleppo, they can still target the outskirts. And yesterday we received 3 missiles in the outskirts of western Aleppo. But the Syrian Arab Army campaign now is being reinforced. And of course, they're going to be pushing those terrorists further back. What I believe their plan is to effectively create 2 islands of terrorist embeds in Idlib. So they'll encircle from Sarakeb to the north and that round in a circle towards the mountains. And that will leave, if you could imagine, an island which will be still occupied by the terrorist groups, but surrounded by the Syrian Arab Army, and then potentially they will try to do the same in the northern area of Idlib. That's, I believe, the strategy, the military strategy right now. And they've taken huge ground in particularly the mountainous areas, which of course will give them a huge advantage of firepower over the remaining terrorist groups surrounded by the army. Okay,
now we've been bombarded in the UK media over the last couple of weeks, Channel 4 News being one of the major culprits, with pro-White Helmets material. Channel 4 News interviewing the head of the White Helmets recently. But I was wondering about this, because that looks like it's not just stickers or or something attached to this monument. It seems to be actually carved into the monument. So they're going to some effort to sort of identify that they've been there.
Yeah, I mean, this is extraordinary. This is actually Umm al-Kubra. But all of this road from basically Aleppo to, as I said, into the western countryside. And I also have to make the point, this area, I was astounded by how luxurious it was. I mean, the houses are beautiful. The countryside is beautiful, full of olive trees, pistachio trees. It's an incredibly rich area. Driving up the road, I photographed every single one. There are a number of Nour al-Din Zinki, which, as I said, is an extremist group formerly backed by the US, that conducted a number of documented war crimes against Syrian people and against children in particular, and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which are al-Qaeda. These two groups worked side by side and in collaboration when they occupied East Aleppo. They were bussed out to Idlib, and as I said, and to the southwest of Aleppo. And as I said, as we drove along this road, almost every one of the more luxurious houses had been turned into a Nusra Front military headquarters or into a Nour al-Din Zinki headquarters. All of the checkpoints were clearly marked Al-Qaeda or Nour al-Din Zinki. And then in the midst of this, you have all the white helmet signs on lampposts. And as you say, this monument to the white helmet presence in Umm al-Kubra, so an area which is basically completely controlled and infested by Al-Qaeda and associated groups, allows the white helmet to have such prominence in amongst these terrorist groups. This would not happen unless the white helmets were working in collaboration with these groups and were approved by these groups. It would be impossible for them to have such recognition if they were not a very primary part of these terrorist groups.
Well, indeed, and one of the points that was attempting to be made by Channel 4, they attempted to make this point, was that the White Helmet's purely humanitarian, just want to get on with their jobs. But of course, the one piece of information that was left out is that they operate exclusively, and we've got to make this point again, they only operate in terrorist-held areas. And so that excuse doesn't really fly.
No, and also the other white helmets that I saw in Sarakeb, in Marat al-Numan, were yet again close or next door to Nusra Front military centers, bomb-making factories. One center that we saw, which it was unclear whether it was white helmet, it was definitely Nusra Front, but there was like a civil defense training tower in that area, and next to the training tower was what looked very much like a small chemical lab. There were a number of chemical ingredients there. There were a number of rockets ready for manufacture to be filled with the ingredients that were clearly inside this small lab. And this is a familiar pattern. I mean, this is something I saw in Aleppo, I saw in Ghouta, I saw throughout Syria in the south. Now I'm seeing it again, but probably more prominently, that the white helmets are effectively completely embedded in these areas that are clearly under control of groups like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, as I said, Nour al-Din Zinki, al-Sham, all manner of armed extremist sectarian groups, and the white helmets are thriving among them. You cannot thrive among these groups unless you share their ideology. And this is something which Western media is refusing to accept, even though they can see very clearly that the white helmets move with the terrorist groups. I mean, why, for example, if the white helmets are a neutral humanitarian group, why did they not stay behind to help returning civilians to come home, to settle again? Instead, no, they got on, they move with Nusra Front. They move to the new front lines. They accompany Nusra Front. They do not accompany civilians.
Yeah. Can I ask a quick question, Vanessa? What's the latest on funding? Is the UK government still funding the White Helmets?
Well, since the demise of James Le Mesurier, of course, and the kind of the shadow that remains over Mayday Rescue and the potential that Mesurier himself was siphoning money out of Mayday Rescue, and that's been reported in Turkish media, by the way. There hasn't, to my knowledge, I haven't checked in the last month or so whether the Foreign Office is still providing funding to Mayday Rescue, because of course it didn't provide it directly to the White Helmets, it provided it through its implementing partner, which was Mayday Rescue. So I'm assuming at the moment there's probably a bit of a freeze in financing, or they may be trying to reroute it through another organization. I'm not aware of any funding in the last 6 weeks coming to the White Helmets, but that doesn't mean to say that it isn't. It could also be that Turkey is financing them, because they are the ones who are now fortifying the terrorist positions, and therefore will probably be fortifying the White Helmet positions, because, as I said, they work side by side. One thing we did see in Sarakeb and Marat al-Numan were a lot of Turkish flags, a lot of Turkish supplied medical equipment, food, very much as we saw in the south. We saw a lot of Israeli medical equipment. We saw a lot of Israeli food stuff in the White Helmet centers and the hospital, the temporary militant hospitals in the south. And we're seeing very similar in Idlib now. We're seeing a lot of Turkish supply, but also Syrian American Medical Society, for example, are yet again, we're seeing their stickers in the Nusra Front occupied hospitals in Marat al-Numan and Sarakeb.
Okay, well, look, Vanessa, thank you very much for that. Now, I know you've got to run, but I'd like you to we've got to move on, but I'd like you to hold on for this next story and maybe get some comments on it if we could, because this is Britain in the Sahel. Britain is now started operations helping countries in the Sahel region deal with their Islamic insurgency problems. So this particular story begins a couple of weeks ago with the Liberian Armed Forces, French and British soldiers training their soldiers in order to deal with the insurgency. This is under the auspices of the United Nations peacekeeping mission, which is known as the United Nations Multi-Dimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission. After they did the Liberian thing, they were heading off to that, which is taking place in Mali. So just so that everybody understands exactly what we're talking about here, this is the Sahel, the greener part on the southern end of the Sahara Desert, and really from the west coast of Africa right across to Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, and so on, is all classed as the Sahel. And David, this is particularly interesting because, of course, we started to see certain people discussing the Sahel. Ursula von der Leyen here, this was at the Munich Security Conference in 2019. She said, I was talking about Africa. This is not a typical place for NATO. We're very committed to NATO. That's the EU in other places. But in Africa, that's a place where we need to be able to act as Europeans. So the EU very excited about the Sahel. And why would they be excited about the Sahel? Well, because they recognize the impact of China in the region in particular. And so, Vanessa, what I was interested in sort of throwing at you out of the blue, as it were, is that I'm fascinated about the fact that this interest from the European Union, from the UK, in helping the Sahel, which now has what even the BBC acknowledges is the fastest growing Islamic insurgency problem anywhere on the planet. And it seems somewhat coincidental to me that from a geopolitical point of view, the EU and the UK and the United States and NATO are starting to get very interested in this region because of what China is doing. And in parallel with that, suddenly we have the greatest rise in Islamic insurgency outside the Middle East, which it seems to me is quite capable of turning the region into something very similar to what we've seen in Syria. So this can't be a coincidence.
No, I mean, we've seen the situation with Boko Haram, of course, which is a very similar organization to Al-Qaeda, and really it's effectively the same thing. It's trying to prevent Chinese expansionism as the United States sees it, although of course it's a very different form of expansionism to US expansionism or even UK expansionism, which is based on neo-colonialist policies. When we see China getting involved, as it is in Syria, it's involved in a very quiet way. It's involved in rebuilding infrastructure, in building roads, in enabling the country, in other words, to farm its own resources. Of course, China will be a benefactor but at least it's working in partnership, and at least it's providing some kind of positive help, constructive help to the country that it's intending to trade with. And of course, this is in direct opposition to how the US effectively rapes and plunders and pillages countries over history. So, of course, yes, it's very possible that this is another operation to prevent, in their view, Chinese expansionism, which threatens US supremacy, of course.
Yes. Right.
Tony Blair was also very keen on the Sahel. It wasn't just Ursula von der Leyen.
Absolutely.
It was
Absolutely.
the same script from Tony.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, Vanessa, thank you very much for joining us today. Great to have you back on the programme.
You're welcome.
We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Right, now just before we leave the Sahel, I should mention that Britain has announced two other projects. Apparently we are setting up an anti-human trafficking child protection unit on the Kenyan coast. That's good news. And we are also setting up a second call for proposals for Business Innovation Challenge in Kenya. This is apparently a 4-year programme to test and support innovations with potential to stimulate large-scale job creation. So stimulating large-scale job creation in Africa. David, what size would you expect that fund to be?
Well, I mean, that would have to run to the tens of millions or the hundreds of millions, surely.
Well, each 5 businesses are going to get £100,000 each.
What?
Right. So
what are they going to do? That's airfares back and forward for Kenya and some rent.
Right.
You don't. That's
not going to generate any jobs, is it?
No, it's chicken feed.
So this is Britain's efforts to be in competition with the Chinese for job creation. I think they're not going to do very well at those sort of levels. But anyway, look, if you like what the UK column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community. There are various options to support us there. Your support much needed and much appreciated. And let me just remind you quickly of MH17 awaiting trial. This is a public meeting and film screening taking place tomorrow at the Conway Hall, Red Lion Square in London. Free admission, and this is all about challenging the EU-NATO version of events surrounding the shoot-down of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 in 2014. Patrick Henningsen and I will be at that. And I think that's going to be a very interesting event. And I do recommend as many people as possible get along to it. Now, David, last week we mentioned the situation with nuclear weapons, that Britain has committed to new nuclear weapons. We pointed out the Russian reaction to this, not necessarily very excited about it. Russia expects a response to Vladimir Putin to extend New START without any preconditions. So really, they're not excited about this resurgence in new design for nuclear weapons, and they want more negotiations to try to get rid of the lot. They're pretty unhappy with the end of the intermediate nuclear treaty. And so the US, we'll just remind you, said we cannot overlook the actions of those states that are expanding and modernizing their nuclear stockpiles, as well as developing exotic delivery systems threatening their neighbors and violating their arms control agreements. She must have been talking about herself.
Exotic delivery systems.
Yes.
What is that? That's a very strange phrase because it's not specific.
Well, I think they're referring there to hypersonic missiles. But anyway, that was the position of the US at the UN last week. And Donald Trump has made a comment about this now. So let's just have a listen to what he had to say.
I will do one more. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. It has been reported yesterday that you are willing at this point to meet with leaders of Russia, China, the UK, and France to discuss arms control issues, among other things.
They all want to discuss arms control, and that's a wise thing. We're spending now over $20 billion on nuclear and on the super speed missiles and many other things. And they have come to me, and they all want to now discuss arms control. And that includes China, and that includes Russia. And I think it's very smart of them to want to do it, and I think it's very smart of us to want to do it.
Okay, so he seems to be on board with new negotiations over non-proliferation.
Clearly.
Right. His State Department, the Defense Department, do you think they are on board with this? Well, in fact, it doesn't look very much like it, because here is General Todd Walters, who is Commander, US European Command, and he's also Commander of NATO. And he has said that he is a fan of flexible first-use policy.
I mean, you told me this earlier before we went live, this quote, and I nearly fell off my seat. That is a threat to Russia, a threat to China, a threat to anybody who might find themselves at odds with American policy. It's a very strange little phrase, a fan. It's a sporting metaphor. This is not the sort of thinking we should be seeing. And it's so aggressive that any wise policy at very senior levels would have that man in and suggest he redeploy his talents in another field.
Yes. Well, I don't think we can say very much more about that. We've got to keep in mind that this new design of nuclear weapons, which is the US and the UK are pursuing, these are small, low-yield tactical nukes, effectively on the end of Trident. And of course, the Russians' main concern about this, we'll reiterate this one more time, is that if what you're deploying is low-yield weapons, they're much more likely to be used. And the Russians extremely concerned about the possibility, the likelihood, in fact, of use. So they are very keen to start some proper negotiations. Putin suggested that the US, the UK, France, Russia and China needed to sit down together at a G5 meeting before the end of the year. It looks like Trump is going to try and organise that. It's going to be a meeting in New York in the not too distant future, so he isn't going to wait till the end of the year. Now, I did wonder at the time whether the US withdrawal from the intermediate treaty was another one of Trump's efforts to do the deal, as it were, put pressure on various parties to come to the table. Whether that's his motivation or not, I think there's a very different motivation within the US Defense Department and the US State Department.
This is the concern, that you're seeing Trump as being almost the opposition to the establishment within the deep state, and the establishment that seems to be embedded within the military, civil service, etc., who have their own policy.
Yes.
Their own policy that's never been debated and never been voted for.
Yeah. Let's move on then to another story that we started off with last week, and that was the Priti Patel, Sir Philip Rutnam spat. In fact, this was an indication of a much broader war within the government, it seems, between the Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson axis and the civil service as a whole. Mark Sedwill, the head of the civil service, had this to say about it. I've received and accepted with great regret the resignation of Philip Rutnam. He went on to say that there's no place for bullying in the civil service and in government and so on. But what has then happened is that the First Division Association, which is the union for the top civil servants in the country, they call themselves the First Division Association. They have called on Mark Sedwill to launch an independent inquiry into Priti Patel, and they say that this inquiry should be led by an external lawyer who has access to ministers' and special advisors' communication records. So this was in a letter to Mark Sedwill, and they said that there was also a need for urgent reform of the process by which civil servants can raise complaints about ministers. This is getting pretty ridiculous, really what I think Boris Johnson needs to do is to get rid of quite a number of these people at permanent secretary level and replace them with people that are more competent.
Well, I mean, this man was called Sir Calamity. That was his nickname. His record had a whole series of disasters on it, a lot of it railway related. And he was one of Mark Sedwill's champions. So he was very much in with the establishment and was a chosen man within the civil service. Now, we've seen the civil service operate quite clearly contrary to the wishes of the British people over Brexit. We've seen them set their own policies in so many areas. It does seem a point where they need to drain the swamp. And we've seen this as the public reaction on Twitter and other things to this spat is very much to side with Priti Patel and cheer on the Boris Johnson government for doing something about the civil service that had let the country down, as certainly the Brexiteers saw it, so badly over so many years.
Well, indeed, particularly bearing in mind she'd only been in post for a couple of weeks. I mean, she didn't really have much time to do much bullying, did she?
Well, this is it. She would have to move pretty fast.
Yes, but of course this internal warfare doesn't seem to be just in Westminster, in Scotland as well, David.
No, I like this. This is a wonderful example. If you've ever watched All the President's Men, the story of Watergate, you'll understand what a denial is where a politician says something's not true in such a way that doesn't really deny the facts. So claims I dislike Nicola, that's Nicola Sturgeon, are just idle speculation, says Joanna Cherry, QC. Now, Joanna Cherry is very central now to the SNP. She's been involved in the SNP civil war on the front lines, leading one of the factions for some time. And she's now making an effort to come back to Edinburgh and be an MSP. So this seems to be positioning herself for the post-Nicola world, as everyone's now expecting Nicola Sturgeon's leadership of the SNP to be of not very long duration.
Okay, well, who's been stealing copies of the Holyrood Daily?
Well, this a quick series of slides. 10% of the members of the Scottish Parliament for the governing Scottish National Party have announced their retirement in the last week. And I thought it would just be quick. It's just worth a quick run through who these people are. Now, the first one here is Richard Lyle, MSP for Uddingston and Bellshill. And there he is next to Derek Mackay, the now disgraced former Cabinet Secretary for Finance, who was grooming a 16-year-old boy online and had to kind of resign, although I don't actually think there's a resignation letter yet. So here he put out this tweet before all the grooming came to light, saying about how Derek Mackay is taking lots of copies of the Holyrood magazine away with his own picture on the front cover. So there we go. We're just applauding some narcissism there. There's nothing that can go wrong with that. But Richard Lyle has declared he's going to retire at the next election, and so is Bruce Crawford, MSP for Stirling. So he's saying, well, I'm enjoying being an MSP. My wife is already retired, and we have wonderful young grandchildren, and he wants to spend more time with the family. So
the spend time with the family excuse.
He's going to spend more time with his family, so he's off. And then we have James Dornan. Now, James Dornan, much more controversial, MSP for Glasgow Cathcart. And he's been he's had a lot of controversy, including over the Celtic abuse scandal, where many of the families felt that he let them down very badly by not speaking out for them, and for being very defensive over the club, which is which is the club he supports. So he's been a controversial character, and he's leaving now. His reasons are he's going to spend more time with his partner and catch up with his family. So he's spending more time with his family as well. And we've got here SNP MSP Gail Ross. Now she's from Caithness, Sutherland and Ross. She's much younger. She's not retiring age. She's 42, but she also wants to spend more time with the family. Ms. Ross here, she did suffer from depression for quite a long time during the Parliament. I know she had a lot of trials with that. And that most certainly deserves a sympathy. But I would also point out that when the Sutherland family went along to see her to discuss the concerns they had over Stephen Sutherland's death, which they and we believe to be murder, she was so moved by it she broke down in tears, but she did not act. So this shows you maybe the degree of robustness and the sort of individual character that is necessary in order to stand up for the individual constituent against the larger organisation. That's what the constituents are looking for when they're let down by police or they're let down by the Fiscal or the Crown Office. They're looking for the MSP to stand up and amplify their voice. And I'm afraid she failed to do that.
And next we've got Michael Russell.
Now, Mike Russell, this is what you call a big fish. Mike Russell is he was the Brexit minister, but we don't really need one anymore, if we ever did. He was also ultimately in charge of education at the point of the named person scheme coming in. So he was actually an overall charge, although he kept well away from it, of the named person scheme for a while. And he was the man who describes the SNP policy as ushering in a practical utopia. So he's off as well. He's also wanting to spend more time with his family.
Okay, and Stuart Stevenson?
And Stuart Stevenson as well. He's from Banff-and-Buchan, and I must admit I have nothing to reprove him with. I don't know anything to this man's discredit, but I will personally miss him because it will prevent us doing all of the Father Jack jokes on Twitter that we've learned to love so much in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes. Okay. Well, we shall move on from that then. And where are we going to? More SNP. Well, fury this time.
More SNP. We covered last week. We covered the scandal that broke over the Flow Job, the pornographically and explicit drag act that was booked to go and do story time in a primary school to primary 1 children. And she went along accompanied by Mary Black, the MP, who was describing what it was like to live under Section 28 to the children. So these are quite adult topics, and a lot of parents were very concerned. So this is the Express reporting the issue. They interviewed a couple of parents. One said, well, I don't agree with abuse being given. My kids go to this school. There was no information fed to the parents about this happening. Surely it's a parent's choice, which seems a reasonable point. And they went on, I'm happy my child is learning about LGBT, but it's taking over the school now. There's something every week. And this is what all the people are seeing. This is not education, this is indoctrination. This is changing the way people think and trying to change society. Now, we covered work by Dr. Bruce Scott, and we're pleased to say we'll have an article up probably in the next day or two by Dr. Bruce Scott looking at the fallout from this issue. But he called it several days out. He said wait and you see, there'll now be a backlash against parents. And sure as you're there, he was absolutely right. And along came the backlash. In this case, it was in the newspaper, the Daily Record. Now, the Daily Record interviewed, or had an article rather, by a Scottish rapper called Loki, is his stage name, and he was speaking. He was speaking about the essentially the homophobia on display, and he was saying that the parents' concern is notoriously unreliable, and parents tend to have very bad judgment about their own children. And he was talking about non-rational parental anxiety, which is a new phrase on me. So it would appear that in the opinion of the Daily Record, if you're concerned about a drag act, speaking to your 5-year-old child without your knowledge or permission, that's non-rational parental anxiety.
I see. Okay. Okay, well, let's move on then. So this continues in the Daily Record. This time hysteria drowns out the real debate going on.
Yes, this is the article I was telling you about. So Darren McGarvey is also known as Loki the rapper. So he's saying there, he's saying when social media accounts contain some explicit, the social media accounts of the drag act contain some explicit references to sex and drugs, actually quite a lot. Some believe excludes them from working with young kids, and I would agree with that. Oh, sorry. Right, there we go. He thinks this is just an example of homophobia. And he says, while I'm hesitant to outrightly rubbish, let me be polite, non-rational parental anxiety, I must reiterate that being queer is not learned behaviour. It can't be taught, only accepted. So this is a demand for queer ideology, queer theory to be taught in primary schools. And this is to change society. This is not about education. And it's not about preventing bullying. It's about something else.
Okay. Okay, look, we're pretty much out of time, David, but let's just finish off with this story here about the BBC.
Well, the BBC in Scotland have some channels which are Scottish-only channels, and no one's watching. Now, you might think, what's the solution to no one watching? Well, the solution, according to Ian Blackford here, is vast amounts of money.
Right.
Right? Because vast amounts of money can sort anything. So Ian Blackford urges 100 million to be spent on the ailing BBC TV channels in Scotland. To make them be all they can be, you understand.
But
So-
why is nobody watching them?
Well, they're rubbish.
Right. Just
Right.
wanted to establish that.
They're rubbish. They're one note. They're politically motivated. They're not responding to a public demand. They're responding to a political demand.
Right.
It's top down. So no one's watching. So he thinks, well, we must make them better. We must spend 100 million. Now, this is what you call reinforcing failure. And whether you're military or in business, this is not a good idea. You should reinforce success. But he wants to reinforce failure with 100 million pounds. And that seems quite a lot of money, given the BBC's current financial problems and tendencies to make people redundant. Here's another example. The BBC, this same failing channel, who were getting as low as 2,700 total viewership for this flagship 9 o'clock news. So almost no one is watching. That's like close to zero. It's a round off error from 0% of the viewing public.
Indeed.
So they're putting a big team over to follow Super Tuesday, just so that we can have a Scottish take on the Democratic primary elections, because that's a good use of taxpayers' money. And I was wondering whether it actually might be cheaper just to take the viewers to America and let them see it live. I think it might be.
It might be. Okay. Well, look, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thank you very much. Really great pleasure to have you in the studio, David, and thank you for joining us. Now, as I say, we are going to be in London. Patrick and I will be in London on tomorrow for the MH17 event. We'll still be in London on Wednesday when we do UK Column News. So it's going to be a bit of a special UK Column News outside the studio on Wednesday. So hopefully that will all come off very well. And we will hopefully see you then at 1 p.m. as usual on Wednesday. We will see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.